neighborhood Richmond schools in the area. So if you are from San Francisco, you probably knew George Washington High School, that's in the Richmond district, known for their view of Golden Gate Bridge, as well as the elementary and middle school in the area. Thanks, Stephen, for sharing my son's picture. In high school, and when I was 16, my first job was at a pharmacy at a mom and pop place. This is at 9th Avenue and Irving. It got bought out a couple years ago by the Swedish pharmacist, but they did get raided for expired narcotic drugs, and it was on the newspaper. But I was gone by then, so this was a great high school starting job of pharmacy. After high school, I got a scholarship at Skyline College for a year where my tuition was paid for. And also, I didn't feel like I wanted to apply to a four-year university because of cost. So like every Skyline student, I took the bio, the chemistry, the OChem, the math courses, and I think for math, I only went up to like applied calculus 2, I think. And then my major at the time was animal science. My goal was to transfer to Davis with the, I guess, I forgot what it's called, but if you take your required classes, you're automatically guaranteed into the college. And so I was there for 3 years at Skyline. And then one day, Stephen made me join a 4 a.m. Tour at Cal Poly. And it was the worst 4-hour drive at 4 in the morning. And we did a tour of it, and Cal Poly at St. Louis Obispo was known for their engineering. But apparently agriculture was number 2, and animal science was actually one of the majors that they offer because it wasn't a common major that people can apply for. So I applied for fun, and I got into Davis, and then as well as I got into Cal Poly. And when I was in Skyline, I did a lot of activities. I was part of MESA. I was part of A-STEP. I was their math tutor there. I was also part of AMSA, which is how I met Nick. I still have my AMSA sweatshirt. I did have a MESA one, but my son kind of spit up on it, so I couldn't wear it. So I guess he didn't like MESA enough. But yeah, I graduated from Skyline after 3 years. And I paid for my own tuition at Skyline. I didn't qualify for financial aid. I was not one of those 4.0 students. I barely got like a 3.0 GPA. And I got into Cal Poly. I ended up choosing Cal Poly. And so Cal Poly was considered a state school. Again, I didn't qualify for financial aid, so I worked part-time there, as well as doing school. And I was working in the engineering department as an admin. And what's great about being an animal science major, not a boring bio major or chemistry major, is that I got to do something fun outside of the lab. So these are broiler chickens. These chickens are actually from Costco. So Cal Poly is contracted with Foster Farms, and we raise chickens. And from the day that they are born to about 8 weeks, they're ready for harvest. And then within a couple of days, they're also at your rotisserie chicken at your Costco. So these are your $4.99 chicken that you get at Costco. So if you ever wonder how long it takes about 8 weeks to grow these chickens. So the Cal Poly students are pretty much free labor. We basically raise them, and then we ship them off for slaughter, I guess, as you would say. Then we also have broiler chickens, and these are our laying hens. And so every morning we would go and collect eggs. And again, we are contracted with different companies and markets, and we sell them off as well. And again, students are free labor, so get started. Another thing is lambing. So every winter we do have a lambing enterprise. So we're up at 3, 4 in the morning to check on the sheep to see how they're doing. And we basically help with them mom sheeps to make sure that they're not in distress and things like that. So we also got to learn how to herd sheep. So it was also really great to be outside in, you know, the fields than being in the labs. Cal Poly is also contracted at Santa Cruz. There's a swan ranch there, and we get our cows from Hawaii. We usually get them around December time, and around May and June, they're ready to go off into the meat factory processing field. So we're able to raise cattle there. We get on horses and we move them to different pastures, fence building, outdoor showers, sleeping in a yurt. Definitely not city life, but that was the closest camping that I could experience. And so that was really great. That was in Santa Cruz. Then we also have the horses. So city girl don't really ride horses, but I got to learn how to ride horses as well as some of the pre-vet care. So we got to learn how to vaccinate horses, help with the birthing, how to saddle them up, taking care of them. So horses was definitely one of the ins and outs of Cal Poly. At Cal Poly, you had to graduate with a senior project, and my research was vitamin D for quails. So our theory was that if we increase vitamin D production in their feeds, we're hoping that the quails that are born will have a higher chance of vitamin D in their system. And it turns out, based on our research, it was a complete fail because our lighting system broke. So they had light for 24 hours. And a lot of quails were under distress, so the females kept killing off the males. So we didn't get to complete the senior project just because of the issue that we had. So not experiments always go through, but we made sure that for future research, we wrote a paper that says that we have to check in the middle of the night to make sure lighting is not a significant issue with your study. So natural environment ruined my senior project, but I still passed because I graduated. So during the time at Cal Poly, I landed an internship with the USDA for 2 summer programs. Basically, I was a compliance investigator intern where I was shadow basically going into plants, food plants, slaughter plants to make sure that the meat are safe for consumers, making sure everything is labeled properly, nothing was adulterated or anything like that. So meats that you get from the supermarket, we want to make sure that live animals to how consumers get it, that they're properly safe. So that was a great experience to have. But after I graduated from Cal Poly, I did a lot of side jobs. So the expectation in life is that when growing up is that all I need is a bachelor's degree or college degree and I will graduate with a 6-figure job. And I think the expectation is that's not true. I feel like any job that you get, any opportunity, either it's paid or unpaid, you take advantage of it. With that experience, you get to grow from it, and hopefully in the future, it would work out. And so my first official job out of Cal Poly graduating, I landed a job at UCSF, and this was animal research. And so in undergrad, as an animal science major, my experience was being out in the field, being out there, and now I'm just stuck in a confined area. And so I got to help researchers choose the different types of mice for research. And for drug studies, they always start in an animal setting. So they would choose the different types of mice that would be associated with their study. So for like a dermatology study, immunotherapy study, they'll definitely choose a nude mice, which is on the top left. Any standard research, they usually go with a generic a black mice, which is for any general research. So if it's a cancer study just to start her off, drug testing, things like that, they always start with a generic C47 black mice. But again, there's different types of genotypes of mice that they use for research. And I was there for about 2 years. And then from all my experience.
Oh, Jasmine, can you, real quick, how much did it cost per mouse? And how
So,
much it costs to house the mouse per month or whatever, or a year? Or...
so it's not like Petco. So you can't just go to Petco and purchase a mice and bring it into UCSF and be like, I want to inject some drugs and see what happens. So these actually come from the vendors that we work with. They are clean. They get housed and sterilized. So to house a cage of mice, up to 5, it's about, we charge the researchers about 80 cents a day. But one of a simple, like the cheapest mouse you can get, honestly, it's about 20 bucks. Okay, so the top left is a nude, is a new mice, and they run about like $50 to $60 for one. If you get a really expensive specific genotype mouse, they can go from $200 to $300 for one little mouse. Upon arrival, they cannot guarantee that the mouse will be alive, and the investigators or doctors still have to pay for it. I remember I shipped one, I think like 5 or 6 mice from Japan, and they ran about like $9,000, and I think only 2 of them survived. So it gets pretty pricey and expensive for the research that they get.
Thanks,
So
Jasmine. You said you also had you had one time like a pig or something like that too show up on your
yeah.
dock? Or?
So we order pigs as well. I hope there's no PETA people on this webcam. No? Okay. Well, we do research on pigs. There are more for cardio research. Pigs run about $400 to $700 depending on the age and the sex of it. But we do get pigs. We're contracted with Davis to get monkeys. Those are neuro studies. So one of them is that they would put an antenna into the monkey's brain, and they would collect data of neural response. So stimulating them with like toys, television. They got like this whole TV set up in their room, and they also have the most healthiest diet, fresh fruits and vegetables every day. And we also get dogs, guinea pigs, ferrets. So there's definitely a lot of research in different animals out there. And fish. We got fish as well too. Yeah. So after 2 years, I went into the cancer center side. So this is after animal development, you go into phase 1 and phase 3 studies of clinical trials. So I handle all the drug safety for all the cancer center trials at UCSF. So if it's melanoma, breast cancer, GI, GU, PEDS, you name it, I was part of it. I worked with different pharma companies to work on consent form languages of what type of side effects you would get. So anytime you would consent to a clinical trial, there's a section in there of risk. So if you were to take this experimental drugs, these are the potential risks that you will be getting. And so I work with a lot of pharma companies as well as PIs, which is principal investigators, to determine what needs to be in that consent form for liability. So just to give patients aware that if they were to enroll in this clinical trial, you'll be expected to, like nausea is common, headaches, things like that. Some rare cases might be infection. They never put death in the consent form because a lot of people will not sign up, but it's one of them. Myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart. So you learn a lot of lay terms, which is about 6th grade language for any person in consent forms. Liver inflammation, any inflammation in your body, swelling, things like that. So I help with that consent form language. So I was there for 2 years, and then now I'm in the pediatric side, which is, again, don't have a slide for that one. So right now I'm a project manager at UCSF for the pediatric neuro-oncology side. I handle all clinical trials and relate it into brain cancer. So in pediatric, there's a lot of funding for leukemia. So if you see a lot of commercials of St. Jude about, people with leukemia, so there's a lot of money being donated for leukemia, but there's not a commercial that's being talked about brain cancer because it's so rare in children that honestly, till this day, there's no cure for brain cancer, depending on what you have, especially if you have a cancer in your brainstem. There is 100% no cure for that because there's a blood-brain barrier and drugs cannot enter into that area. So we're working on certain clinical trials where we would inject a catheter into the patient and we would directly put the drug directly in there surgically. So right now, all our clinical trials are still under active. So there's no publication or any pictures or anything that I can share at the moment. Probably in the next couple of years, we are working on some publications to see some of the theories of drugs that we have. So there's really not much since it's still PHI related materials. But that's the works that I'm doing right now. So I manage the startup, the maintenance of the study, so working with investigators, recruiting patients, of getting them to see if they're eligible to meet the inclusion and exclusion criteria, protocol writing, consent form languages, budget negotiation with sponsors, contracting, anything in the realms of a clinical trial for pediatric. That is my current role right now.
So where are
yeah.
you at? Are you at the China Basin area? Or are you
So all the cancer center is usually located in Parnassus, Mission Bay, and Mount Zion. But as of this year, we are moving all the clinical trials at Mission Bay. They just opened a new building down at Mission Bay for all the clinical trials. So where the Warrior Stadium is, the infusion lab is, you're facing it directly. So you get the ocean view as well as the Warrior Stadium there. But yeah, all the clinical trials cancer treatment is actually not Mission Bay. So one thing that I know most people are at Skyline College is probably in the pre-med route. And I can honestly say, working with some of the doctors now and what the tech companies are, you would expect that as a doctor that you would potentially get a six-figure salary right off the bat. So working with doing budget negotiation, things like that, just want to let you know that you're going to get a bachelor, 4 to 5 years. You might get into med school right after your bachelor, and that's another 45 years. Then you would also need to do 2 to 3 years of fellowship and then potentially get a attending job. So you're looking about another decade of school, and I have seen a lot of fellows and becoming and attending, and it's a lot of work, a lot of debt, and not also promising of that job that you always wanted. So there's always a job at UCSF. It's called a CRC, which is a clinical research coordinator. And a lot of people that graduate with a bachelor's usually apply for that position. They wanted to be sure that if they really want to be a doctor, either in the research side, it's a really great position. And it's usually hired all year long at the cancer center. And basically you work with the nurse practitioners, you work with the investigator doctors, you're part of the treating team where you help with the consenting, making sure that patients are coming in at their scheduled times, a lot of data entries. It's a lot of grunt work, but you also see the day-to-day activities of what the doctors do, and it gives a better picture of like, do I really want to go to med school? Is this a job for me? Do I really want to do research? For me, doctor was never my thing. I never want to see patients, so I was never into that job, but I work with the CRCs a lot, and I do see a lot of fresh out of a bachelor applying for that job to see if really med school is my thing. So if you are unsure if med school is your thing, that is also a really great position right after you get your bachelor. and they're always hiring. But with the COVID-19, there is a hiring freeze until next summer of 2021. But since you're at Skyline, I'm assuming that you won't be getting your bachelor in the next year or two. But that is a potential opportunity that you can have. I know the minimum requirement for that CRC position is a high school diploma, but a good, at least a bachelor is also very helpful to get that position.
You're saying if somebody has, but if somebody has the math skills and the people skills and stuff like that, that position they can do. And do you think that would be a good job for somebody to do for 2 years? Well, so
Yeah.
while they're doing their, Skyline work?
So a lot of people who don't get into medical school, that is a good 1 to 2 year job, because when you do apply for med school, you have to go through interviews because you have the field experience. It's easier to pass your interviews. I've seen a lot of coordinators, work there for a year and they apply for med school and they get in. I have a few that worked a couple years and then they applied for medical school, or they just applied and they just decide not to go to medical school and they stay within UCSF and they just work around the system. Either they work as a coordinator or they become a supervisor, coordinator, or just different positions within UCSF. But yeah, you can definitely work there for a year or two and then apply for medical school. It's super common for people to do that.
It's also common. I mean, people don't necessarily go to med school or go to nursing or whatever. I mean, so there are people who work there who have their degrees who aren't necessarily who didn't necessarily go through the medical route. And so, what would that look like?
I didn't go through the medical route. I started off in animal research and I end up with pediatric cancer. So when I applied for UCSF, to me, I always thought like grades were important. When I apply, are they going to look at my transcript? UCSF didn't look at my transcript. They looked at my resume. They looked at the experience I had. They knew I was well-rounded because it wasn't just about school. It was the different types of jobs I applied for. Yes, they were admin jobs, as an assistant or, being a front desk or things like that. But it shows that I had personal experience. And when I went into an interview, I had confidence talking to a stranger and say, this is what I can do. I have a bachelor, but they don't ask you for grades. They just ask you, what can you do? What can you prove to work for us? And I think that's what I had from all the jobs that I had, was just, I'm personable, I can get the job done, let me do it, hire me. And that was the confidence that I had, and that was what I had. I had a lot of administrative jobs, but I'm very proud of where I am right now at UCSF. Within like 5 years, I'm on my 3rd position. I'm willing to look for other positions, but there is a hiring freeze, so I'm fine with that as well. I'm just happy that I still have a job. But it's just the expectation that you have for yourself is that you always want to give yourself a little bit low, and you don't want to stop yourself because of the salary they give you, because you just want to take what you have. It's so much better than unemployment. But you just take that experience and you take it to the next job and say, I can do it. And I think that, working at UCSF, don't assume that pre-med is the only route that you can take. You might do the job and you might love it and you just be like, I don't want to go to med school. Is that really what I want to do? And a lot of people are very happy being a coordinator. There are like senior levels coordinator that you can work your way up. And it's a great opportunity to start there.
Actually, from Lily on chat, she wants to know what your day-to-day work schedule looks like, and I think you should probably do pre-COVID and after COVID. Kind of, what do you do? What's your day like?
So pre-COVID is I manage about 5 to 10 studies. There are different areas. So either it's getting where a pharmaceutical company would be like, hey, I want you to open this study with your principal investigator. So you are assigned principal investigator and you work on startups. So you work in submitting your protocol within different channels. You work on budget negotiation, contracting language. consent form reviews. And then also you also have studies that are already open. So the nurse practitioners and doctors see patients day to day. And if they see that a patient is eligible for the study, I will work on getting them, making sure that they meet the criteria of the study, making sure that they can meet the study. So not only do they get experimental drugs, they also need to make sure they're available for imaging, MRI, CT scans, blood work, PKs, and radiation that's being done. And then also checking to see if they have any adverse events, side effects, along with the study, reporting to FDA if there's anything that's relatable to the drug that we need to report.
So you
So,
go in at 8 o'clock during the day, and you have
oh,
an office
so
and sit
I
in there?
start from 7:30. Usually I end at 4. Sometimes longer, depending on if we have a patient. So if we have a patient that we need to consent, you could be working all the way to 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. There was one time I worked all the way to 9. So it really depends because patient comes first. So we would
So
do
you have to go
whatever.
find the patient with the paperwork and have them sign it and talk to them, or
The nurse practitioner or doctors do it. I'm more of the behind the scenes. So I do not see any of the pediatric patients. I refuse to see any of the pediatric patient. I refuse to go into the hospital. So I'm very happy to be behind the scenes, behind the computer, handling all that, making sure language is correct, everything is signed off, they're being scheduled correctly. Things that needs to be reportable needs to be done. So I'm more of kind of like the admin, but also the overall responsibility to go person for that protocol. So I need to know ins and outs of the protocols, when cycles they need to come in, what things need to be reported to either the university, to the pharma company, or FDA. So you have to be it's a very independent role, but also a team player. But you have to take a lot of responsibility and ownership of your work. So it's very busy day to day. There's times where it's slow. So usually with the winter holidays, summers, major holidays, they do get very slow because patients don't want to be treated on Christmas. They don't want to be on a clinical trial. And so those are usually the slower times where we catch up. But usually the day-to-day operation is pretty crazy. But again, sometimes they're really slow. So it really depends on the patient population as well.
so post-COVID, how do you do the same thing now? You just do it at home?
So post-COVID is I'm working home, which is great because I get to work around my son's sleepy schedule. But yeah, the times are about the same. It's just I miss having multiple monitors. I don't miss the commute. I shouldn't be complaining about the commute because I live in San Francisco, but I don't miss shuttling to work. And so, but it's great to just work in my pajamas and do the day-to-day things. But for the COVID thing, we are struggling to enroll patients right now. We try to prevent so pediatric patients with brain cancer is immune compromised. So we do not want them coming in if they do not need to. If they cannot meet some of the criteria of coming in for lab works or anything like that, we do not want the patients to come in. We don't want to treat them. Treating them as in we don't want them in an experimental study. We do have standard of care where we can provide comfort, but anything that resolve killing the cancer or trying to get rid of the cancer, it's not something that we are shooting for just because they won't get their full study and procedures done if they are enrolled. So a lot of patients are not being enrolled at all. If they're already enrolled, we'll try to treat them as much as possible. But so far, our enrollments has slowed down dramatically.
Okay, I don't know if you've seen Lane ask challenges with consents, with the language, with the signatures.
So a lot of times, consent forms are usually about 30 to 40 pages.
30 to 40.
30 to 40 pages. Yeah. It's a liability form. It's also with the HIPAA form, PHI. So normally a copy of the consent form would say, This study is run by this PI, and it talks about the procedures. So general procedures, risk language, like, so for example, in one of my studies, you'll be doing with a lot of radiation. So we'll also have pre-screening information. So if you're pre-screened, you have to voluntarily give a certain amount of blood. You have to be able to come and take this, either an oral medication or an IV, or you have to do a biopsy. Then you also have to report anything. So you have to tell us if you're taking any drugs. As sometimes you might have to take a pregnancy test for girls. And then we also talk about cost. If your insurance does not pay for it, is the pharmaceutical company going to pay for it? Then we talk about drug risk language. So if you take this drug, what are the potential risks that you're going to have, likely risk? Then you have all the standard language of, if I had an MRI, what are the radiations, aspect, reproductive, general health. What happens if I don't want to be part of the study anymore? Is my information going to be shared? Is anything that you expect is all in like 30 to 40 pages, because lawsuit is very common. Parents that hope that their parents will do well, or if you say that you're coming in on cycle 1 day 1 and they don't come in on cycle 1 day 1, they come in on a different cycle, then it'd be like, well, you told me to come on this cycle, but then I'm coming to this different cycle. Lawsuits can happen, rescheduling. Parents would get really upset that you made me drive my kid over here and we're not getting treated. So it's a huge liability, and we always want to make sure that what they're signing is what is happening to them, and also additional language that might not happen, but we want to cover our basis. So it also follows lawsuits, as well as making sure being transparent of what they expect to be on the study. And there's always that it's not guaranteed that you will be treated, based on the conditions that you have. So it's about 30 to 40 pages that you have to read in and out, and making sure that you are not a liability to the university and to the doctors.
And
Yeah.
then that all has to be in their native language. So if they only speak Spanish, it's Spanish or Chinese or.
So it's usually an English consent form. We do have some Spanish consent form language. If we don't, we usually have a translator. So there'll be a line in the consent form that a third-party person is there to translate any questions that you have. But Spanish consent form is very common, especially in a HIPAA. But normally it's in English setting, with a translator if needed. Yep.
And they still do the old-fashioned signatures, or
Yep. So there will be, for pediatrics, there are adolescents, and then parental consent forms. And so there will be a lot of language like your child. And then there's also I will be aware. So it's I and your child is common for the consent form language. So there's two different types of consent forms. And then there's the assent, which is a short form consent forms.
And so some of these are like double-blind studies. So you may get people who aren't going to be treated. So they may get like a spinal tap, yet they're just being treated with saline, or how do they do that?
In pediatric brain cancer, we're still in the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. So phase 1 is basically drug tolerance and drug safety. So basically we'll start them off at the lowest dose, and then once we see an adverse event, we'll see if it's progression due to the cancer, or is it based by the drug, and that will determine phase 2, which is basically a larger group, and they start at a higher dose to see if they are tolerable to the medication. Phase 3 is randomization. So there is one study that we're starting on phase 3 for randomization. It's like radiation. So you have the standard conventional radiation, and then you also have the hyperfractionated radiation. So a lot of patients would want to go for the standard radiation because it's a common, they don't have to be, so for a child to be in a radiation setting, to have them sit still is not easy. So a lot of times we have to give them medication just to ease the movement, just to relax them a little bit. So the hyperfractionated radiation does take longer. So because it's randomized, you don't know until you sign consent, determine eligibility, and then you get randomized. But for pediatric brain, we don't have the phase 3 open yet. So everything is still in the phase 1 and phase 2 in the tolerability stage, which is pretty sad because it's 2020 and we still don't have a phase 3 study. And there just isn't enough research to share for other hospitals and universities to move forward, as well as FDA submissions for that. So, and it's really hard to get a pharma company to provide drug for pediatric because each child is different. They're different age, how they absorb the drug is different in their body. Compared to adults, the bodies are fully developed for adults, but for pediatric brain, their brain is still developing. So it's really hard for a pharma company to invest billions of dollars in a study where they are probably not going to get good results. Especially anytime a child dies due to being in a study, they have to report that to FDA. So the numbers on pharma companies don't look good for them. So it's very hard to get a pharma company to be part of a pediatric study, not just brain cancer, but just any pediatric study.
Wow. So what kind of reward do you get every day out of doing this? Isn't it kind of depressing working for cancer and seeing these adverse effects and stuff? Or
We attend like fundraising events, and we do see some of the patients that we had treated before. So a lot of them, the smaller end patients, we do see a relapse in them, but normally we see some of them before they have their relapse. I think before I had a child, I was fine with it. I think as long as I don't see the child, I would be okay. But now that we hear a lot of how patients are doing, and then now that you have your own child, it's a little bit harder. But the end goal is that you just want at least one treatment that works. And because there isn't, you just hope for the best. And that's what makes it rewarding, is that there's no cure for brain cancer for pediatric. And because you're part of this study, you feel like there's a movement going and you get to spread the word. And hopefully, there'll be some big pharma company that's willing to spend all that money to help be part of that research. And we do work with a few big pharma companies, and they do see the passion that we have, and they're willing to give us their drug. But there's just not as much drive as the adult studies that we have. If you go to ct.gov, that's where all the clinical trials happen throughout the United States. And if you look at adults studies, there's thousands of clinical trials for adults. But for pediatric, it's very hard to find at least 100 that's willing to open, even if it's just leukemia, solid tumors. There are just not that many pediatric studies, and it's just not an easy topic to talk about, nor do people want to think about, like, I want to open a pediatric study. So it's more of the end game. Like, we just hope for the best, and it's just more rewarding that way, knowing that there's going to be that one kid that will have a potential of being treated, and hopefully, for the best. We did get some patients like from China, Mexico, that would come and try the clinical trial out, but we never know what the end results are because they would only be here for a couple of days and then they leave. And they don't have insurance, and they spend thousands of dollars transferring money to the United States to see if there's a potential cure for their child. So it just comes down to like end results. I know it's not promising for kids, but at least we have studies and we're working towards it. And we have a lot of, investigators throughout the United States that we work with, and they all have the end goal of like, let's have some compassion for these children, and just think of something that we can do to help them. May not be a cure, but just like, just a standard of care that they can have, that we can bring to the FDA, to the government, just some sort of funding that we can continue on the research.
Okay, we got a question from Jessica. If I'm currently studying to be an RN, but also interested in behind scenes position like lab clinical trials, are there RN positions available in lab clinical trials?
Oh yeah. In clinical trials, we work with like doctors, nurse practitioners, we have research nurse, we have 2 registered nurses that I work with in the pediatric side. Each disease group department has their own registered nurse. So it's not just like, you don't have to go to a regular healthy hospital to be a registered nurse. You can actually go into research side and also be a registered nurse. They also pay more in research side. So bonus there. Yeah.
So there's lots of that. Okay. Do you
Yeah.
notice any ethical issues related to clinical research?
There's always a lot of ethical issues with clinical trials.
What are some of the ethical issues? What do you have to look at? What are you doing?
Um, there's everything. I mean, like, I mean, mm, I think I guess I would say one ethical issue is maybe there is a huge difference if you have insurance or you don't have insurance. Um, it's you know how at UCSF it's very we are open to the public. If you don't have insurance, we'll still take you. Um, things like that, and we're just like we're open to everybody. But honestly, when you join a clinical trial, they will run in your insurance. They will run your insurance. If your insurance does not cover for it, they have to find alternative ways to pay for it. So it's not like, yes, you are eligible, but there's also a criteria of can you pay for it? Because there's always costs associated. So there's always that gray area of like, oh, I meet the criteria, please enroll my child. But then there's always that billing department where it's like, well, we'll have to talk. So there's always costs associated. There's also internal of like patient population, that would meet the criteria, things like that, exceptions to the rules. So there's always little bits of here and there.
Okay. Question: does brain cancer usually start somewhere else?
Um, it depends. So a lot of times, like usually we hit a lot of patients around fall time. So you know how before they go to school, they have to do a physical. And so they do a physical, they say, oh, I have a headache. And a lot of doctors are like, you're a child, you're healthy, you're fine. But then there's some doctors that'll be like, no, let's do an MRI. Let's see what's going on. But if they do see a little tumor there, and then they'll do a full CT scan, things like that. But most of the times it does come up straight from the brain. Sometimes it could be metastasized from different areas from the body. So we do see different cases. But yeah, it's common to see one that starts in the brain. Brainstem is also common as well. But again, you have that rare population of parents coming in or kids coming in. So it also depends on their family physician, how well they take it seriously. But usually the common sign is like, I have a headache, I'm getting blurry vision. And then it's also like, maybe you need glasses. Did you fall? And so it really depends. But yes, it's common to start at the brain. Rare, but it's common.
Do you know what the numbers are for the population? About how many out of 1,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000? Is it?
I feel like I should know this number, but I don't know on top of my head. I know that they had a lot of rallies going at DC about awareness of pediatric brain cancer, but there's actually a good amount. I think the issue is like celebrities do take a huge role in it. So, when you have a celebrity that donates to St. Jude because of leukemia, that, oh my gosh, there's a lot of kids with just leukemia, but they don't think of other types of cancer. There's also one, I think like Jimmy Kimmel's son, who was born with a heart defect, and CHLA got all this funding for cardio. So I think a lot of studies, like Angelina Jolie had a BRCA test. No one knew what a BRCA test is. So it's also common at UCSF. So BRCA usually happens in females. If you are tested positive for it, you have a higher chance of ovarian breast cancer. And so nobody knows about this until a celebrity brings it onto the news. So until there's a celebrity or someone that's really out there to be in the media that says, hey, my child has brain cancer, no one's going to be aware of it. I mean, a lot of people that have cancer are just, mom and pop down the street, or, that goes to a school, and they're just not out there in the media. So it's common to have brain cancer, but I think it's just not the numbers that people expect. Get a celebrity, advertise something. I'm sure it'll be out there. Yeah.
So, so you've been out of school for a while now, and I know there's a hiring freeze. Kind of, what's your next step? What do you want to do next?
I think I definitely want to keep my job going for the next year, depending on how COVID happens. But I think I'm more towards in the regulatory side. I like policies, writing SOPs, doing things like that. So I'm considering moving up in that area at UCSF. I work with a lot.
So we mean regulatory. What do people, explain to people, what do you mean by regulatory? What's regulatory?
So regulatory is documents that you use for FDA. So you have a 1572, for example. So those are documents that you fill out to say who is responsible for the study, where the patients are being seen, things that needs to be submitted to FDA, any government related things. You can't just go into university and say, I want to start a study. You have to draft protocols and have them ready, fill out forms that get submitted to FDA, go into calls and explain, pitch speech them. Those are regulatory documents that you need, and licensing. And so I am more into implementing policies. So anything that you get submitted goes into our institute research committee, and they review all protocols, all PIs, things like that, to see if it's ethical, is it safe for patients. So I'm more into that area. We're reviewing studies. Should we move them forward? Now that I have that patient-related material. So it's more of implementing it to other studies. And so I would think that would probably be my next stage at UCSF. Pharma company's a little bit too dark. I don't know if I want to join them just yet.
Yeah. What's the pay rate of something like that? That step, or do companies pay more?
So at UCSF, I don't know how it is like at Skyline, things like that, but when you apply for a job, for example, you have, so some positions is a set salary, some of them you can negotiate, and then once you get into UCSF, if you want to either lateral over to the same grade or move up, you can only get up to 15% of your salary. So you would negotiate with them, but you can only go up to 15, and then as you work your way up, you go up to 15. So right now, a clinical coordinator, I believe starting salary is, I think, $68,000 or $70,000 with full benefits and pensions after 5 years. And then I think a supervisor role is about 80. And so again, these are just like right off bachelor. And so it really depends, but usually a lot of time, and then you have your merit during the summertime, which is about 3 to 5% raise. So it's just more of like, be smart when you do apply for UCSF, is to negotiate, do your research of what the average salary of that team is doing. When I started UCSF, there wasn't really, it was a really small group, so I didn't get to have that big negotiation. But don't expect like a pharma tech company salary, because this is UCSF, so it is like state funded. But, you know, you're there for the expectation of having a lower salary compared to a pharma company. But I believe CRCs run about like 60-ish to 70,000. Yeah, which is pretty good.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, full benefits. I think benefits is like the big thing, because insurance is pretty expensive. So it's pretty great that UCSF pays, I think, 90% of whatever insurance you choose. Dental and vision is free. They do not match you retirement, but they do have a pension after 5 years. And they have these little small perks. But I think UCSF is a great starting position, with the, you know, because you have all these trainings, you learn different roles. And so that helps you if you do want to move to pharma company, because pharma companies, you're just set on doing one task. UCSF, they expect you to do multiple tasks. And so that's where the expectation lies, is a little bit lower salary, but you learn a lot more and the different systems around the university.
So I know you got to get going pretty soon. We'll let you go in a little bit. But what do you think about this COVID of producing, you know, a drug or a vaccine for that? I mean, you've been working to try and cure brain cancer for 3 years now, and you don't even have a phase 3 study yet. What do you think about the prospect of getting a vaccine by next year so we can all go outside again?
Actually, one of our study uses a measles vaccine. Yeah, we use measles vaccine. We use that to target the cancer directly. And so far it's doing very promising. So usually the average, so the time you get, the day that you state that you have brain cancer, the average expectancy is 9 months for pediatric, okay? When you are in a clinical trial, it gives you either a couple months more time, a couple years more time, but it gives you more than 9 months, maybe less depending on if you caught the brain cancer sooner, if there's a clinical trial for you, depending on how motivated your child and your family is on moving forward. But most clinical trials right now are really in that early stage, and we do have one where we use measles vaccine, and it is pretty promising. The patients are in the trial for at least 2 years now, so it is very promising for measles. So that could be a potential for brain. For COVID, I know there's a lot of research being sent. We do get a lot of newsletter that there's a lot of PIs very interested in running some COVID trials. There are some pharma companies like Gilead, which is in South City, I believe, or Half Moon Bay, South City. They also have a potential drug that they are using for COVID. So a lot of drugs that are mainly treating for flu-like symptoms are being reevaluated for COVID. Yeah. Honestly, just wash your hands, people. Like, seriously, wash your hands. Like, it's nothing new. I mean, people die from flu and all the other stuff. There's vaccines for flu. People don't get their flu vaccines. But just wash your hands. Like, seriously, wash your hands. I mean, like, when Patrick was born, we were, like, going through soap. Like, there was nothing. Like, we were washing our hands for everything. But just wash your hands. Hygiene. I feel like this is, like, back to
Dr. Case wrote an article in the 90s about washing your hands. I'll send you the link to it. It's a really cool article.
Yeah, just wash your hands, people. It's common, you know, you go outside, you come home, wash your hands. After you use the bathroom, wash your hands. When you're about to eat, wash your hands. Like, just wash your hands. Invest in soap and not just play with the water. Like, you gotta, like, really rub it in your skin, you know, just, I mean, you can't just pump soap and then just rinse it off the water, because you just waste the money of soap in your water from your sink. So you gotta use it. Just rub it. So that's my advice, is wash your hands. Wash your hands. You know,
Study hard.
Study hard, sure. Why not? Get a job if you can. Just don't have that expectation of just, you know, Don't smoke like Dr. Case. Yeah. Smoking is bad for you, people. I know 420 was totally off the grid for this year, but I know, bummer.
I don't get
You know, if I could drink, I would really want to drink, but because I'm nursing, I can't drink. So yeah, I know
Okay.
alcohol sales went up